Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Dentist Money Show, where we help dentists make smart financial decisions. Today on the show we have Brannon Moncrief from McLaren Associates. We're talking about the most common questions and common mistakes of selling to a DSO in the year of 2024. But we appreciate Brannon for all of his time and education and expertise. He knows so much about this space and subject. This was a really helpful interview. Thanks, Brannon. Thanks to all of you for joining us. If you have any questions, go to dentistadvisors.com. And I would love to have a chat with you anytime. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the show.
Consult an advisor or conduct your own due diligence when making financial decisions. General principles discussed during this program do not constitute personal advice. This program is furnished by Dentist Advisors, a registered investment advisor.
This is Dentist Money.
We're live. We're recording. Brannon, thanks for joining us again, man. Appreciate it. This is a returning guest spot. I like it.
Yeah,
thanks
man.
for doing
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Always good to be here.
For those who might not know who you are, have missed previous episodes, give us a little intro, who you are, what you do, and your favorite bowl of cereal.
I'm Brannon Moncrief, Principal CEO of McLaren and Associates. I've spent my entire professional career in dentistry, particularly in the merger and acquisition space. So spent about a decade as a lender, lending money to dentists all across the country to buy, start, and expand practices. And then 13 years ago, I acquired McLaren and Associates. The legacy business that I acquired that still exists today specializes in doctor-to-doctor private buyer practice sales, like traditional practice transitions from one doctor to another. We do about 50 of those a year. And then about 5 years ago, we built out a team to represent larger practice owners who are looking to monetize their business in the DSO and private equity space. So we do sell-side advisory for practice owners to help educate them about, what is their EBITDA, what's the value of their business, private buyer versus DSO, what are all the different options and deal structures available in the marketplace. And then once they're fully educated about what their business is worth and what their options are, whichever path they want to go down, sell to a private buyer or affiliate with a DSO, we make sure that we create optionality and leverage so that they find the right fit, find the right deal structure, and maximize their economic outcome.
Yeah, cool, man. I have a lot of questions top of mind that are the questions we hear all the time about the space. They're probably things you all see all the time and repeat yourself constantly about. How many DSOs are in the market right now?
So, there's over 500 DSOs.
Okay, I was underestimating. Okay.
There are a ton of DSOs, but DSO it's just nothing more than a legal distinction, right? Dental service organization. What that means is you bifurcate the ownership of the practice between a clinical entity, a doctor-owned entity that owns the patient records, and a business entity that essentially controls all the other assets, tangible assets of the business, the lease, things like that. Now, as far as, how many DSOs are actually acquiring
like bigger money. Yeah, they're out there growing.
Yeah, that are private equity backed. Ballpark, about 200.
Jeez, still so many.
It's still a lot. And we work closely with about 60 because, they're good DSOs, they're bad DSOs. We're pretty protective about who we allow to sit at the table and bid on our clients' practices.
Yeah.
So we work with a select group, a subset of those DSOs that buy practices that we know, we trust. Our clients have had good experiences and they're aggressive in bidding, have plenty of money.
The follow-up to that comes from a question I had from a client, which was, should I just go direct and shop the DSOs myself? And as I was trying to explain this, out of the hundreds and hundreds, the deal structures across all of those are very different, right? Depending on what they want and what the doctor wants. Can you talk a little bit about how that can differ?
Yeah, the short answer to that question is not no, it's hell no. That's a really bad idea.
That's what I said.
Yeah, especially given what I just said, there's good DSOs, there's bad DSOs. There are some that are set up for long-term sustainability, and there are some that are not. A handful of them will fail, and a handful of them will get a unicorn positive outcome, and everything else will fall in between. But we say this a lot. If you met one DSO, you met one DSO. There's a lot of different flavors out there in today's marketplace. Every DSO has a different financial sponsor, a different deal structure, a different level of management and infrastructure. They're all at a different stage in their recapitalization cycle. They all are carrying a different level of leverage.
Yeah.
They all have a different approach to supporting and managing, the businesses that they acquire. So the most important thing is you've got to create optionality. You've got to create optionality for really two reasons. One, because you got to find the right fit, the right partner. You're going to have a 3 to 5 year post closing commitment, so you're not going anywhere. So it's going to be important who you partner with. The deal structure is going to involve cash and equity, so that equity is going to be substantial and could have great upside or terrible downside depending on who you partner with. And the only way to ensure that you get maximum value is to hold their feet to the fire and put them in a competitive bid process. When people ask what we do for our clients, essentially I tell them we create a bidding war among as many buyers as possible.
Yeah. Assuming someone got through that entire hurdle of selecting which ones meet their needs, which ones are viable out of hundreds and hundreds, how much do the offers and contracts change during negotiations?
They can change remarkably. About half our clients already are talking to a DSO. Maybe their buddy sold to that DSO, or
Got it.
they got a marketing piece in the mail or whatever, and they already have an offer on the table. So I could tell this story over and over and over again. But we just had a client on the West Coast, OMS client, that had what they thought was a pretty attractive offer from a legitimate DSO that's relatively well known in the OMS world. And they were referred to us by their CPA. We did a EBIT analysis and came back with a valuation expectation that was considerably higher than the offer they had in hand. And they hired us and allowed us to run that competitive bid process. We gave that same DSO a seat at the table. And ultimately, our client chose to sell to the DSO that had made that unsolicited offer, but they chose to sell at a valuation of 2.6 million higher than the initial offer.
Yeah.
Simply by following the process. Nothing really changed other than the fact that they thought they had a good offer. They just didn't know how good it could be when you put the DSOs in a competitive environment.
Yeah. These are just not things that the average dentist, even maybe the above average dentist who even has a high degree of interest in this stuff, is going to have time or expertise to pull off. And when you're talking about these numbers, like you said, you're talking about seven figures, sometimes multiple seven figures that are on the table or left. And that seems like a dangerous sport to engage in without any proper guidance and coaching. Those are some of the common ones. Oh, one more, actually, it's really common right now, is how many of those DSOs out there are in trouble, struggling?
There is a fair number of DSOs that have been in trouble, recently. And that's a product of the fact that the macroeconomic environment has changed quite a bit over the past 24 months. All private equity-backed businesses carry a heavy amount of leverage or debt. And when that debt gets exponentially more expensive and harder to acquire, it puts these businesses under duress to some degree. So there have been a handful of DSOs that have failed. And when I say failed, that means that the private equity firm has had to give the keys to the DSO to the lender. Now, what will happen over time will be interesting. I mean, some of those lenders will just, divest the assets and take a huge loss, and some of those practices will close. Some lenders will, whether themselves or through hiring a third-party consulting firm, they'll turn the business around and eventually sell it to a private equity firm, and that DSO may survive long term. Knock on wood, because we're so protective in who we allow to bid on our practices, we have yet to have a client lose $1 of equity. We're just very vigilant in how we vet DSOs, who we work with, and how we navigate the process. There are other DSOs that have hit multiple recaps and generated a 15x return on invested capital over the past 15 years. And then, like I said before, all the other outcomes have fallen, somewhere in between. But it is critical to discuss the fact that the equity component does have risk. And I think that's one of the reasons why we are busier today than we've ever been. It's because doctors have realized that we know what they don't, because we're at the DICOMA meeting, we're at the ADSO meeting, we hear all the water cooler talk, right? We know who's in trouble and who's not. And when you interface with all these DSOs on a daily basis, we can pretty quickly tell if we were going to bet our money on a particular DSO, who's going to make it and who is not, based on their management team, based on their financial sponsor, based on their deal structure, and based on their buying behavior. What are they buying? Do they use any discipline? What does their underwriting look like? What are their guidelines as far as, what type of practices they're looking to buy. And there's some that have been relatively undisciplined and paid elevated multiples. Those are the ones that have gotten into trouble, more recently. And there are others that have a very defined game plan, a deal structure that's going to be sustainable long term. They've done a good job of aligning incentives with their partner doctors at both the DSO and the practice level. And they've got a great management team and a great financial sponsor. So we're constantly evaluating, who's who in the zoo, and, who do we want to allow in the door and who do we want to keep out?
Yeah, I was going to ask how do you even go about vetting, but you just did that very well. And that seems like a very overwhelming list of things to understand and know and what to look for. Yeah, it's your full-time job. It's not a dentist's full-time job. That can be very daunting. You said something about they're placing a lot of risk when multiple seven figures at times of these deals are sitting in equity of these bigger companies. And sometimes I'll put it to my clients like, hey, you're going to get handed a sum of money and you're going to put $1 million or maybe $2 million into a single privately held stock. What kind of do you want to do that by yourself, or like how much on the inside do you want to see before you put $1 million on one stock? Like, what company would you ever be comfortable doing that with? And it's, that's always kind of like a realization for them. Like, oh yeah, that is what I'm doing. This isn't all just like, oh cool, there's my offer, I'll just sign it, let's go. A giant chunk of your money that you've earned from building this company is in a single stock. So how much help do you want figuring this
Yeah.
out?
Yeah. And I do want to mention there are pros and cons to that, right? So right now you own a business that has a lot of key man risk and you have 100% invested in
It's
that
like key
one
finger risk.
stock.
It's not even like
Yeah, right.
key person risk. It's just
Yeah.
like
Key hand risk, whatever
it's
you
like
want to call
key
it.
hand
Yeah.
risk. Yeah.
So you currently have 100% of that equity vested in one business that in large part is predicated upon the performance of one individual.
Yeah.
That's risky, right?
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
through monetizing a piece of that business, you're taking some chips off the table, giving it to somebody like you to diversify it in other asset classes. But then there is this one component, right, that is getting invested in a privately held, non-marketable stock. The difference is, that stock to some degree is more diversified than your own. Now, if it's diversified in a bunch of practices that are not high quality, that's not necessarily a good thing, right?
Yep.
But if it's diversified in a lot of good assets, a lot of good practices like your own, I think it can be a positive thing.
Yeah, but even the list you just mentioned, thinking about like, oh, okay, I'm going to take one of hundreds of companies, and how am I as a dentist going to know what their capital structure is, and like what other deals have they done, and who are their partners, who are their managing team, what kind of experiences everyone. That's just not research the average person is going to be able to pull off or even know what to ask. I mean, you don't even know the question to ask. So yeah, I think you've detailed that really well. While we're on the subject of common questions, what are you getting a lot right now? We're recording this fall of 2024. You've been to a lot of conferences lately, tons of activity. It seems like it's picking up a little bit more with rates changing. What are the common questions you're getting right now?
I think what we're seeing right now is because of the level of uncertainty with the election cycle, because of that's causing some people to sell because they're worried about which administration is going to go into power and how that's going to impact the economy. For some other people, it's paralysis by analysis and they're holding until after the election. But I think most people are concerned about taxes. And we can all agree that, taxes are going to go up. The Trump tax breaks are going to expire in 2026. And regardless which administration is in power, they're not likely going to be renewed. So ordinary income tax, some of the pass through, taxes are tax breaks are going to go away. And then there's a real threat that even if the right is elected, the capital gains tax is going to increase substantially. And when you monetize a business like a dental practice, the majority of the sale is taxed as a capital gain. And currently, that rate is as low as it's ever been, currently sitting at 20%. There are threats that it could go as high as 35 to 40%. And it's been at that level in the past. A lot of people don't remember that because it's been so long. So right now, there is a tax arbitrage advantage associated with monetizing your business. And when you do that, you're converting EBITDA, future ordinary income, taxed at your highest tax
Yeah.
rate,
Yep.
you're converting it into a capital gain.
Yeah.
Well, right now, that's converting income at a 38% rate into a capital gain at a 20% rate. There's some significant tax arbitrage there that could disappear, at some point in the future when capital gains rates increase.
Sure. Yeah. And folks, talk to your CPAs.
Yeah.
Ask your CPA. Okay. So, yeah, I think that is really top of mind for people. Just like what's going to happen in the economy, what's going to happen with the election. What
And,
are,
and
yeah.
multiples, people are also asking about like,
Oh, okay.
well, obviously the market was super frothy in
Yeah.
21 and 22. Valuations went up in the DSO world by 30-40% post COVID. And then when the macroeconomic conditions changed, the market softened slightly. I
Yeah.
would say it softened more so for like class B and C assets. Class A assets are still trading for
Sure.
elevated multiples, still near a high water mark. But a lot of people are asking, hey, with interest rates going down, are multiples going back up or valuations going back up? Because valuations in our world, from my opinion, really haven't been depressed. I don't think they're going to go up remarkably, but I
Hmm.
think you are going to see more buyers in the marketplace in 25 and 26 than there has been in 23
Yeah.
and 24, because you're going to see some recaps. Private equity is not going to be under as much pressure when interest rates are a little bit lower. So I think you're going to see, more and more DSOs come back to market and start acquiring practices again.
Yeah, cool. Another question that has been really common lately, and this comes from people they've made the decision to sell. That's what's best for them. It's what they want to do in their lives and their practice, their businesses. Sometimes they'll ask, well, what if I just spent a little bit of time trying to make these more valuable? What if I just spent a little bit of time trying to make my EBITDA go up? And most of these people are either running one very large, multi-producer location or multiple locations. So these are big operations, a lot of times. And they're asking the question, what would it take? Or maybe I should just spend, a lot of times they'll throw out like 12 months or 18 months just building up EBITDA. And we're assuming a business that's already running pretty well. How would you respond? I'm sure you get that too.
Yeah.
What could we do? Like, what could we juice this up? How do you respond to that? What do you think about that?
It depends. So it depends on a lot of different variables, but we try to encourage people to start this conversation early, to do an EBIT analysis, to do evaluation so that we can unpack, where you currently stand. What is the current value of your business? How does that compare to, your ultimate goal? And if you've got time on your side, then how do we help reverse engineer the outcome you're looking to achieve, and what levers do we need to pull within the business to get there? So we're doing a lot of that early on
Just anyway.
valuation
Yeah.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then coaching them to the outcome that they want to get to. I mean, at any given time, we've got 40, 50 practice owners that we've done valuations and we're tracking them. Like every 6 months, every year, we'll roll forward the numbers, update the EBIT analysis, and talk about where we're at. In fact, I listed a practice yesterday in Chicago, and I've been talking with that practice owner for 3 years. And his EBITDA went from 400,000 to 600,000 to 800,000. 800,000 was the goal. Once he hit it in a trailing 12-month period, I got the phone call. Hey, let's roll it forward.
Got
I'm
it.
ready to rock and roll.
Yeah, but you just said 3 years. I mean, that wasn't, and I assume those 3 years weren't him doing like just what he's been doing up to that point. He had to do new things. He probably had to invest in the practice, hire people, I assume, maybe spend more time. It wasn't just a passive thing, sit around and wait. He had to like do a lot of
No.
work over
Yeah.
3 years.
He relocated his office to a new facility, added a couple of associates, and really intentionally ramped it up.
Yeah.
And I think he's got it now where it is going to be sustainable, long term, year after
Yeah.
year. I think his practice will continue to grow, but not grow at the clip it has over the
Yeah,
past
it's not
3
going to
years.
double. Yeah.
Right.
How often do you see practices where you can easily find, I don't like the phrase quick fix, but a relatively easier fix than a 3-year problem or project in your valuations where you're like, hey, let's give this a few quarters, let's give this 6 months or whatever? How often does that happen?
It happens periodically. I think the two things I've seen most recently are being overly aggressive and writing off personal and discretionary expenses through the business to
Okay.
the point that they're very difficult to pull out of the business.
Yeah.
Like, you're writing off hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in personal expenses through office supplies and dental supplies,
Hmm.
but you haven't really tracked it and you can't provide like clear evidence of
Yeah.
that. And then not reporting cash. We've seen that quite a bit. And when you don't report cash, every dollar you don't report is a dollar of EBITDA.
Yeah.
These practices are trading for 7 to 9 times EBITDA. So you can imagine if you're not reporting 50 grand worth of cash, that could be
Yeah.
350, $400,000 in value.
Yeah. Huge. Yeah, and thanks for kind of spelling that out. I when I have these conversations, I try to make the distinction. You might have a practice owner who's already kind of maxed out, spending as much time as they really can or want to practice, might actually be doing fairly well. And the concept of, big growth in order to sell or to raise EBITDA, like it's just going to usually require either like there's an obvious small fix, something that can be changed in a matter of months, or it's, like the previous example where it's like, okay, you're going to have to spend, I imagine your person who relocated in Chicago spent a lot of money to relocate, build it out. I mean,
And
there's
it worked
significant,
out, but
and
yeah,
it
it was a big
worked.
investment. It was a
Yeah.
risk.
It was a risk investment. It was time. It was probably more of his time for a while. So yeah, I just want to make that distinction because I think sometimes people get caught up in okay, it's time to sell. This is right for me. I'm ready for this. They get some preliminary stuff done and then they, I don't know, get cold feet, which is understandable, or they just feel like, oh, maybe I can just juice this a little more, a little more EBITDA, a little more EBITDA. Do you find that? Like, is that a common, people just get scared?
Yeah, I think
Do
so.
they back away?
Sometimes they get scared, they get cold feet, whether it's before we go to market or
Yeah,
2 weeks before close. And I think that's a natural emotion that most of
totally.
our
Yeah.
clients go through. Because it's impactful financially. It's also impactful emotionally,
Huge.
professionally, personally. You've got to unpack all of that before you
Yeah.
decide to go down this path. But I do think it's funny sometimes when we have a conversation with a client, their business has been successful but
Yeah.
relatively flat, and they're looking to sell because they want better work-life balance or they want help from an administrative perspective. And they're like, well, I think I'm going to ramp this thing
I
up
know.
before. And I'm like, well,
Why haven't you yet?
yeah, you're talking about moving the business the opposite direction. The reason
Yeah.
you called me is because you want to take a step back. Now you're
Yeah.
talking about leaning
In.
in
Exactly.
for 2 years, 3 years to
Yeah.
build it up and try to generate this exponential outcome at sale. Oftentimes, what we find is they get 6 months into it and they're like, yeah, never mind. And
Yeah.
they call me and they're ready to go to market.
Yeah. Yeah. What are the reasons that you tell someone it's not time? How often do you go through someone's, situation and you tell them, hey, hold off for X, Y, or Z?
So if they had a bad day
Okay.
or a
Or
bad month,
bad month, stressed at work.
and
Yeah.
that's why I get the phone call. I'm like, hey, I
Ah,
think this is maybe a temporary
it's
issue.
emotional. Yeah.
Yeah, emotional response. Why don't you wait another month and then let's
Mm.
talk and see how you feel.
Can you spot that pretty well? I mean, we
Yeah,
get the same stuff too. You're like, I think this decision you're trying to make
yeah.
feels like you're
Don't
really
make a decision
stressed.
in haste or under duress.
Yeah.
You don't want to make an emotional business decision. They normally don't turn out great. Occasionally we'll have a doc that says, "Hey, I'm 40 years old. I'm not going anywhere. I want to be in this practice for the next 15 years." And the management isn't really a big deal to me. I'm happy. I just want to see what this looks like economically. Rarely does that make sense, right?
Yeah. Okay.
If your runway's that long
Hmm.
and you're not looking to de-risk or you're not looking for administrative
There's no
support,
major life change you're trying to make.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're not going to relocate or
Yeah.
pursue another career.
Yeah.
I don't know why you do it other than FOMO, and FOMO is not a good reason to
Hmm.
monetize your business. So those are two things that
Yeah.
we run into from time to time.
That makes
We just
sense.
try to take a holistic approach to like getting to know the practice, but also getting to know the person.
Hmm.
And we're plenty busy. I don't need to convince somebody to take their practice to market when it's not right for them. So we're always talking about the why, right? Talk to me about your professional goals, your personal goals, your financial goals. Talk to me about your runway to exiting the business. Talk to me about what keeps you up at night and what gets you out of bed in the morning.
Yeah.
And once we've unpacked all of that, we know the practice, we know the person, then we can make some recommendations as to what's in your best interest. And that's how we've built our reputation. And that's how most of our clients have built their reputation with
Yeah.
their patients. So
Yeah.
you take care of them, everything else kind of takes care
Yeah,
of
it's like
itself.
extensive discovery before there's any like solutions or strategy presented. And from what you said earlier, being hundreds of options in the market, even the narrow group of 60 is still like a lot. And once you get to know those dentists, there's probably like some DSOs that would really work for them and what they want, and then some that totally wouldn't. And you have to be able to match those up because it's like you said, you meet one, you meet one.
Yeah, and occasionally we will, we might bid it out to 15, 20 different DSOs. And I know that there's going to be DSOs that bid that no way in hell I'm going to let my client, based on
Oh,
their
yeah.
why, sell to that particular DSO. But I think it's important for you to see what you don't want just as much it is to see what you do want, because that's how you build perspective. And we go through that process of taking that holistic approach. I'll just be honest, not only for the client,
Hmm.
it's also a bit selfish, because the reality is 2 weeks before close, if this wasn't right for you, you're going to know it in your gut and
Yeah.
you're going to pull back. So
Oh, yeah.
let's not waste our time, your
No, yeah.
time, the DSO's time going through all of this, which can be a pretty stressful process
Yeah.
when we haven't done the work on the front end to make sure that this really makes sense for you.
Yeah, totally, man. What are you seeing right now is like, and maybe we've already covered them in some of these questions, but what are you seeing as some common mistakes people are making when they're approaching the decision or selecting a partner?
I mean, we hear about the horror stories. We hear about seller's remorse. We don't really have it with our
Hmm.
clients because of
Sure.
how we've designed the process, but
Yeah.
that's typically, selling prematurely, selling to the wrong DSO, selling for the wrong reasons, and or leaving money on the table. So we already
Oh, yeah.
covered, some of the mistakes, like don't respond to unsolicited offers, create a competitive environment, control the narrative regarding EBITDA, make sure you've got a great team of advisors, all the people that it takes, to get a deal done. That's a sell side advisor, like us. That's your financial planner and advisor, your CPA, your
Yeah.
attorney. We all need to be at the table to make sure that, you get the outcome that you deserve. And then falling for a gimmick, we've seen a lot of these roll up
Mm,
concepts out there. Hey, your practice is worth 6x on your own, but if you join our
yeah.
co-op, we're going to sell for 13x, and you're going to pay me a bunch of fees along the way in exchange for that unicorn outcome. And
Hmm.
the unicorn outcome has not come for any of
So you bring up a good point, man. We've seen the hype, a lot of groups trying the roll ups. It seems like a lot of them have fallen short. A lot of deals have fell through, never even made it to the finish line, leaving dozens, sometimes maybe hundreds collectively of practices that were planning on this event now back to square one. Any more you want to say about roll ups and what you're seeing there?
Look, I'll just say that that concept was invented in a completely different environment that was very, very frothy, where several DSOs were eyeing an IPO. And the
Mm,
concept was that these DSOs, right before they IPO, will acquire this huge bundle of practices and they'll pay an elevated multiple because their
yeah.
IPO, they're going to hit a
Yeah.
20x return. Well, guess what? IPOs have been sidelined. They're not going to happen anytime soon, even if
Mm,
they do happen at some point in the future. Recaps have been delayed and muted over the past 24 months. Private equity has had to get a lot smarter in
hmm.
dentistry because of the macroeconomic conditions changing, because of the fact that, look, there have been some private equity firms lose money now in
Yeah.
the dental
Yeah.
space.
Yep.
It is not completely a no brainer. You can't just
Yeah.
throw money at it and think that you can buy practices for 8x and sell them for 15x
That was all the
without,
low hanging fruit like 5 years ago, huh? It just got
yeah,
taken up and yeah.
that acquire and flip game is dead. It's dead. You actually have to build a sustainable business, be prepared to operate it
Yeah.
long term. So that concept is not palatable to the marketplace at
Hmm.
all. And those that are pitching it either don't fundamentally understand our industry, DSOs, and how private equity works, or they're being predatory.
Yeah.
It's one or
Hmm.
the other.
Yeah, yeah. I totally agree with that. Thanks for indulging all of my questions. That's taken the bulk of our time so
Oh, man,
far.
this is great.
What messages would you want to give people as we close out 2024? And I mean, anything that we haven't covered already, what's important to you to tell people right now?
I think the most important thing is plan in advance, get educated, make sure that you're getting objective guidance so that you can have a clear head and can make, the smart decision for the future of your business. And that's how we try to position ourselves, is to be that voice of reason to help filter all the noise and all the bullshit out in the marketplace, because you hear wildly good things and wildly bad things, and trying to sort through like what's real and what's
Yeah.
not.
What's the in between? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So get educated about your options. If you've got a large practice, you've got a lot of options available to you. So
Mhm.
we'd love the opportunity to have a discovery call, a casual conversation to get to know each other and see if it makes sense to do evaluation.
Yeah, man. I'll have you tell everyone where to find you in a second. I thought of one more question that seems kind of poignant. It's from the other side of the owners. It's the associates that have been in practices. Not uncommonly, I'm hearing more and more stories of associates who are kind of blindsided in a lot of these transactions, thinking like, oh, I joined this practice. Maybe I took an income hit, or I lived in a city I didn't totally want to be in, but I had this partnership opportunity. And, the owner got an offer and took it. And now I'm kind of left like, oh, there goes my is there anything you could say to associates navigating this? It's a new world. I mean, it is what it is. Is there anything you could say to associates to maybe have a heads up or plan ahead when choosing a career or a practice to be a part of, now that this is part of the equation for a lot of owners?
I'll kind of talk to the both sides of that
Yeah, yeah.
fence. I think it's a great point to bring up, because we're seeing it and hearing
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it.
And it is a both sides thing. Totally, because it's the
It
owner
is a
and
both
yeah.
sides
Yeah.
thing. Look, if you are, especially if you're like moving across the country to join a
Mhm.
practice or what have you, with the promise that you're going to become an equity owner at some point, we have on our doctor to doctor side of our business what we call an associate to purchase transition model. In that model, you have to agree to all the terms of the future partnership before you ever work a day in the office. And you have a honeymoon period where either party can back out,
Sure.
but at least the rules of engagement have been clarified. Like, when is a buy-in or a sale going to take place? How is the practice going to be valued at that point in time? What's the relationship going to be up till then and after then? I would want to know all of that. If I'm going to bet, change my life to join this practice,
Yeah.
I would want to lock in as much of that on the front end as I possibly could via some form of written document, whether it
Mhm.
be a letter of intent or even just an email that you can reference later and say, hey,
Yeah.
this is what we agreed to. I think that's important. On the sell side, as the practice owner, just be very mindful of the conversations you have with your associate doctors. If you promise them equity and you mention a date or you mention how the practice is going to be valued, they are paying attention. That is not a casual conversation.
Yeah.
They'll be able to tell you what you were wearing and what the weather looked like outside the day you
Yep.
had that conversation.
Yep.
So make sure that you make promises thoughtfully. And then if you have a multi-doc practice, if you are going to bring in equity partners, you are communicating to the outside world that they are critical to the success of your business, whether they own 5% or 50% of your business. And when a sale takes place, if you want to monetize the remaining equity in a DSO transaction, even if you have a drag along, tag along right, you can drag that minority partner with you to that sale. If they're a big producer, if they're important to the business and they're not complicit with that decision and the DSO knows about it, your deal's dead.
Yeah.
So you've got to figure out a way to, one, have those conversations on the front end if the ultimate goal is to sell to a DSO, so that everybody's swimming the same direction from day one. Again, establishing those rules of engagement up front and then checking in, along the way to make sure that everybody's still swimming the same direction. I think that's critically important. And if for some reason you're not all swimming the same direction at the time you want to monetize your equity in the DSO world, just understand that you might have to incentivize them with, whether it's associate or minority partners, with, some type of transaction
Yeah.
bonus, retention bonus, equity,
I was going to
whatever it
ask
may
about
be.
that. Is that getting more common?
It
Say
is.
like, yeah, hey, this wasn't on the table when we started talking and building this together, but now it is. We're going to do it, but you're going to get kicked a certain percentage or a certain bonus dollar amount to stick with the practice and keep going. And yeah.
Especially if we have a senior partner or a senior owner that is not planning to fulfill that 5-year commitment chair
Oh,
side,
oh yeah,
then the associates or the minority partners, the more youthful doctors, they're the future of the practice.
yeah,
The DSO is going to want them to have some skin in the game.
that's
So
true.
yeah, whether it's a retention bonus, transaction bonus, some type of equity gifting, whatever
Mhm.
it may be, yeah, you've got to find a lever you can pull to keep, everybody aligned moving forward and make the DSO comfortable
Yeah.
that there's going to be continuity
It's
of
their
care.
asset. Yeah. These conversations just remind me of the two sides of the coin, which is dentistry is such a cool profession. There's so much opportunity, more than there ever has been for all different types of careers, but it is more competitive than ever. And it's more crucial to be so well informed and to do everything in such an organized way when you do things. It's not the days of it wasn't that long ago, man, that dentistry was a spit and a handshake. It was, a sign outside and no website and no growth plan. And like that, you just did that for 40 years and it was wildly successful.
I remember. I mean,
Yeah,
early on in my career, that's what a lot of practices look like.
that's all it was.
It's a different animal now. It's a totally different animal. You got to be a lot more intentional.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot more mindful about the decisions you make because there's more at stake.
Yep. Yeah, there's more at stake. Thanks for all this, man, by the way. I appreciate it. This has been really good. Where do people find you? Where do they reach out?
Yeah, so I always give away my cell phone number. All I do all day long. I know I'm crazy. All I do all day long is talk to large practice owners. That's my job within our company.
Okay.
So my cell is 512-660-8505. Best thing to do is probably to text me, and then we can set up a time to call. My email is Brannon@dentaltransitions.com, BRANNON at dentaltransitions.com. And check out our website, dentaltransitions.com. It's got a lot of conversations just like this. It's kind of designed to educate people regarding, private buyer versus DSO. And would love to schedule just a casual discovery call with your audience and get to know them and educate them and see what makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate the education piece, for always doing this with us. Thanks for your time, man. Thanks to all you for listening and tuning in. We'll catch you next time. Bye-bye now.
Thanks, Ryan.